everyone. My name is Minister Wallace, and again, thank you for joining in on my channel. Today in Bible Tidbits, we're going to take a look at a passage that shows up in all three of the Synoptic Gospels. The Synoptic Gospels being Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's Jesus, and he's talking to his disciples and a large crowd. And he's talking about, he uses a phrase that sometimes we pull out of the text, out of context, and we misuse it. And that phrase is our cross. Listen to what Jesus says. In Luke 9:23, by the way, it's mentioned in Matthew 16:24, Mark 8:34, and Luke 9:23. In Luke 9:23, it says, and he was saying to them all, if anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. So sometimes we look at that cross to carry and we'll use it in Christian speak as more so of a burden. Well, it's just it's something that we carry. It's just a struggle. It's just something that we have to deal with. We'll assign it to a certain part of our life, or there may be something that's just hard to do. There's a person, just for example, you have a ministry and there's somebody in there who's just disruptive or they don't want to help out or just kind of causing trouble all the time. Sometimes some well-intentioned Christians will say, well, it's just your cross to carry, as in your burden to carry. But really, that's not what Jesus meant. When Jesus was telling his disciples about what this cross was, that's not what he meant. So how do we understand what he meant? Well, we have to establish the correct historical context. So we know we're in the Gospels. So we know we're in about AD 40-ish, somewhere in that time. So we got to go back to that time. Because the only way that we understand what is being said is we have to understand what the audience would have received it as. In other words, that may have sounded too complicated. For us to understand what the cross, and I'm talking about the physical cross, what the physical cross was, we have to understand what it meant to the original hearers. And the original hearers were somewhere in AD 40. Well, here's what it was. So crucifixion was not new. Crucifixion did not come about because of Christ. Crucifixion was something that the Romans, I don't know if they started it, but it's something they did that's how they killed criminals and those folks who were the most heinous folks of society of that time. They crucified them. Now, we don't know, most historians, we don't know if it was actually a cross, if it was actually a T shape. Some say it was an X shape. Some say it was just a pole. Really, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter what shape it was. We know from history, though, that they didn't have machines and they would suspend this human body in the air of sorts. So we can the reason why the cross came about is because we can look through the text and you can see arms spread apart whenever he was nailed. So it must have had a longer beam. So the shape is not important. What's important is crucifixion was done to kill folks. Okay, so if you were a person in AD 40-ish, and when you seen somebody walking down the street or they were coming through the aisle and there was a bunch of guards around them and they were carrying a cross or an object, whatever it was, their hands were nailed to a beam, you knew right then, his time is up. Because you understood in that era, that meant that he was getting ready to die. So for us, we really don't have anything like that. In our penal system, I think we got the last meal. That when that prisoner gets that last meal and they see the priest, then that's it. So sort of in that sense, loosely, all those other prisoners know when that priest comes and that last meal comes, he's getting ready to be put to death. So in AD 40, no matter where it was in Roman society, if anybody seen somebody walking down the road and they had a bunch of guards around them in a crowd and hands were nailed to a board, you wasn't going to see him or her tomorrow. Crucifixion was understood, so they knew, and we'll just use cross, they knew when that person was carrying that device or their hands were attached to it already, but when that person was carrying that device, you knew that, hey, that person is about to give his life. Well, not about to give his life, but he's about to be crucified. So now, when Jesus was walking through the streets and he was carrying what we believe to be the cross or his crucifixion object, everybody of that time understood that he was getting ready to be killed. Now that we understand what everybody in that era understood that to be, now we can go back to the text. And now when we hear Jesus say in Luke 9:23 that he must deny himself and take up his cross daily, that means that you must be willing first to die to self. That when you pick up that cross, that is symbolic of that everybody know, look, you are willing to die to self. In other words, die to self means it is not my way all the time. It's God's way. Well, how do we understand God's way? Well, through Bible study. We have to understand God's word. But that cross meant that you were going to give your life. Okay, so for us, when Jesus commands us to pick up that cross, he does so commanding us that we must be willing to die and to embrace God's will no matter the consequences. That's what it meant. So when you hear pick up your cross, hey, that means that you are ready to sacrifice yourself for Christ. So thank you again. I hope this shed some light on this topic. If you want more of this, please click the subscribe button. We thank you for joining in, and God bless.